With restrictions easing, people are slowly being reunited with their families. For those with family abroad, they have not been able to see them for months. Will a similar easing take place for those with family abroad, or will seeing family be incorporated as an exception to international travel, like the exception to travel for business purposes?
Beatrice, thanks very much. I think that the most important thing that we've got to do right now as we continue to immunise great numbers of people in this country is protect our country insofar as we can. And it's never going to be perfect, but do as much as we can to prevent the virus coming back in from abroad and new variants coming in from abroad. So the rules about what you can do, what people can do to see their families abroad will be governed entirely by the rules that cover travel abroad and people coming from abroad. So at the moment, as you know, it's still forbidden to travel. We'll be saying a bit more on April the 5th about what the Global Travel Task Force has come up with. And clearly, at the moment, it is, there are lots of countries that are on a red list, 35 countries on a red list, where we have very stringent measures in place for them, for people arriving from those countries. They have to go immediately into hotel quarantine. And if you're coming from anywhere else, you also face pretty tough quarantine rules. So we will be, Beatrice, we will be saying more about seeing family abroad and travel abroad, but it won't be until at least April the 5th. Anybody want to say any more on that? Thanks, Beatrice. Let's go to Julia from Margate. Julia asks, myself and my husband have had our first dose of the Pfizer vaccine and are due to have our second dose at the end of April. Will this be impacted by the recent shortage of supplies, and what does the government plan to do about it? Well, Julia, I think I can answer that question very briefly and succinctly by saying that, that there isn't any need to worry about shortage of Pfizer for the second dose as far as we can see at the moment, and we're going to continue to roll that out and supply that. And as I said, April is going to be the second dose month. Very important that everybody gets their second dose. Hugh Pittman from the BBC.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Isn't there a danger of mixed messaging when you talk both about a roadmap to freedom and getting back towards normal life, but also the need to be cautious because of cases rising in some parts of Europe? And a question for Professor Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance. How concerned are you about what's happening in some European countries with cases and what that might mean for the UK? And have you given your approval to the next stage of easing on April the 12th, the opening of outdoor hospitality and non-essential retail and so on?
Well, thanks very much, Hugh. And you're absolutely right that we're pleased to be able to have some measure of relaxation today. It is important, it is valuable. I know it will be prized by people, but also very important to stress that we are continuing to be cautious. And the whole point about the roadmap and the timescale that we've got is it gives us a chance to evaluate the data as we go forward. And as for the April the 12th phase, we'll be saying more about that in due course. Obviously, same goes for May the 17th, June the 21st. They all depend on the four conditions. But I wonder whether Chris or Patrick, you want to say more?
Yes.
Sorry, Patrick.
Sorry.
No, Patrick, you go.
Well, I think when we discussed the gap between stages, the idea was to have 5 weeks to allow data to be assessed in the 4th week, which is the earliest we think we can get a good handle on what's happened. And so that's next week. So that's when the analysis of the effects of the initial opening of going back to school can be assessed, and at that point we'll be able to give the recommendations. So far, as Chris has laid out, everything's moving in the right direction, but we need to do a formal data analysis next week.
In terms of the, are we concerned about what's happening in Europe and elsewhere? Well, I mean, in those, anybody would be concerned about any country in the world where rates are going up, because that has a big impact on people's health and lives. So I think, as citizens of the world, we will all be concerned about any of those countries. For the UK, there are two risks. There's always a higher risk. If any country's got a higher rate than you have, then there is a risk of net importation of COVID. But the much bigger risk, and the one that we're all concerned about, is the risk of variants of concern. These are COVID variants which might, and I want to stress the word might, have a problem with the vaccine where the vaccine is less effective against them. And so the main thing we're concerned about is the risk of importing into the UK variants which could have a reduced effectiveness of the vaccines we're currently using. Now, in the long term, there would be ways around that, but in the short term, that is the principal thing that's driving concerns about border issues at this stage. In terms of giving approval, it's not really for Sir Patrick or me to give approval of things, but certainly we've been involved heavily in all the decisions in terms of giving technical advice to ministers.